Revenge was about forbidden love and betrayal. It was so strong and so blatant, the sexuality, that I didn't need to find a concept. The concept was there on the page, I just had to attack it.
This was about sex. It was about the eruptive emotions and violence that can come from betrayal, from sex itself, you know, from the darker side of it.
This movie deals with the loyalty of friendship, and it deals with the seductiveness of a woman and how they can get under your skin.
Revenge had gone through every major director in Hollywood. I remember sitting with anyone from Sidney Pollack to Jonathan Demme to Francis Coppola, and all at one particular time or another they were desperate to make this film, and they couldn't get a handle on the script. I had worked with Jack Nicholson immediately after this movie, and Revenge was written for him, and it was Jack's dream to make this film. And you know, the movie went ahead because of Costner's participation, but it had a long, very, very difficult history.
You know, Revenge was sitting there, and I kept chasing it and you know, trying to get it, and that was getting back to my roots, which was darkness, you know, this dark journey. That was my commitment to Revenge. I think this was one of the easiest movies to cast, when I say to cast in my mind, you know, because I'd never had any second thoughts about Kevin, and Kevin came attached to the project. He was my first choice, regardless of Ray Stark bringing him to it.
My first movie that I wanted to direct was Revenge, and you know, approached, you know, Ray Stark, and people just felt I wasn't ready. Ray didn't feel that I was ready. So then as we began to explore, you know, other directors, you know, I liked Tony Scott really a lot. I just thought he was just such a strong, you know, visual guy.
It was a very hot property. You know, Kevin was very hot, and Nancy was this, you know, this old superstar, and Maddie was the new hot property as well.
At the time, it's one of those projects. I think my film career had just sort of started at that particular point, and I think, if not mistaken, Kevin Costner had suggested me for the role.
Madeleine was my first choice. You know, I looked at lots of other girls, but there's nobody came close. You know, and that 30 seconds with Madeleine looking at her short skirt and her legs crossed, that did it. She was so immediate, and I felt there should be this immediacy in terms of wanting to watch and look and sexuality.
Well, she's one of the true beauties in our business, and she also is a very brave actress and very talented.
Tony was very, very specific about how he felt I should look in this movie. He wanted very straightened hair, and he shortened my hair a good deal, and red lipstick. I remember going to work in the morning. By the time I came out of hair and makeup, you know, he had ensured that the transformation was very strong. So when he shot me from the most sort of exotic angles.
You know, Anthony was an actor of his time, so he will forever remain one of our giants.
I've always been a huge fan of Anthony's, and he was always a big fan of the movie. And more than anything, he loved the process of shooting. He loved working in Mexico, he loved working with those guys, and he loved the story.
I think it took Anthony home. There were, outside the lines of making the movie, he was surrounded by friends down there.
Apart from Kevin and Madeleine and Anthony, I had a great cast, and I say, there's never any second guessing in terms of the cast. You know, I had Miguel Ferrer and John Leguizamo, and a plethora of great Mexican actors. You know, that was early on in their careers, but I think my cast was perfectly molded for this world and Mexico.
The passion in the story, the vindictiveness, all of those kind of things sort of played out in the landscape.
Tony used that landscape. You know, he insisted on being down there. We shot in Durango, Puerto Vallarta, Cuernavaca, and Mexico City. And, you know, there's nobody better with their camera than Tony, and he used it all up.
Mexico, I've got a real soft spot for Mexico. It's hard to articulate why. I mean, I love the people. The people have an enormous heart and compassion, and the Mexican crews, they gave me blood, and the locations are just spectacular.
A lot of times the locations were far away, which meant I had to get there really, really early because I had to do a lot of severe makeup. And in fact, my face was almost scarred permanently from that movie. But I felt it was really important to establish that he almost lost his life in this beating. It was a beating of all beatings. It's how Harrison wrote it. It's how Tony shot it.
Initially, where Tony had a shoot in Durango, it was a very kind of hard, tough Western landscape. And that was for the body of the film, where the two lovers are kept apart. And this terrible, terrible journey is going on for Kevin. There was Cuernavaca, which was far more civilized and genteel and beautiful, where Mireia and Tiburon lived. There was also Puerto Vallarta, and that was sort of at the beginning of the love affair.
I think the movie is very much a reflection of the period in terms of the light. It became my stamp in terms of hard light coming through wafting curtains and stuff, but it felt right for this material. And the movie does have a period feel to it, but I still think it doesn't age with time. It still stands up. The performances are great.
I should go. I believed really strongly and was very emotionally invested in this character's life. It meant everything to me. What was very, very interesting is that I believe that Kevin had a different take, and I think that he felt that this man didn't really know that he loved her until it was too late.
When you see great tragedy, even though we don't like to watch them necessarily, if we have a great understanding of them, of the people involved, and that if their stories are complete, we have a level of understanding. You saw how trapped she was. You saw how she was treated.
Only horse smoke in public. Oh, Jay, this is Mireia, my wife.
You saw the cracks in the door, and it was just through bad judgment, people continued to slip and slide into their way that ultimately leads to this, this great violence and just the sadness. People risked their lives in this movie in terms of the characters did to have this sexual attraction. It was drawing them against all their good instincts. We don't want to believe that we could do that. On the other hand, we know that we're human beings, and Jim Harrison wrote all the little tumblers that you see the fall, why he could make this choice. I mean, he basically says on the line to his friend, I mean, he cuts right to it. It's a single word. He goes, "I'm fucked."
What's the matter with you? What happened?
I think I fell in love.
I'm like, there's a thing that's happening. I mean, the guy couldn't even make lemonade.
Sex scenes and, love scenes are the hardest things to do because they're being done to death, And normally in sex scenes, I always feel a little uncomfortable, because the sex scenes in my other movies, I could have a little bit or a lot of it, And this, I needed a lot of it. And so I felt good about pursuing and spending time and giving days to doing those scenes.
There were some very explicit scenes, some of which are in the movie, bits and pieces taken out of it. But to him, the physical love was very, very, physical erotic love was very important.
We went to the point of just, unreleased energy of just people that just couldn't get at each other soon enough.
And I had to convince Kevin and Madeleine that, that was the way to do it. And they were bored. I said, we shouldn't be pulling out punches here because that's the center of the story. It's about, forbidden love, and it's about unrequited passion.
It went hand in hand that the sex scenes were just kind of really bold.
I never felt exploited. I mean, I have been in other situations where I said, "Why do you want to do this?" But this had to be in your face.
And so I'd give them ideas, I'd load them with ideas, but I wouldn't say, okay, we're going to do an insert of, Kevin sucking Madeleine's fingers, or I had 3 cameras and I'd just grab what I got and I'd say, you've got to find yourselves in the moment, you've got to believe in what you're doing, you've got to believe in the passion and the conviction with which you're attacking each other. There's this sort of animalistic quality to it, so.
For as stylistic and as good a director as Tony, he's a really good person. And so Tony really cared, about my comfort level with everything.
And it's really about making actors comfortable about your vision, and that you're not going to misrepresent them. It's not going to become an X or a porno sequence.
And there were a lot of debates back and forth about what should be admissible in the scene and not. There were a number of different tests that were done. The audience would sort of shift uncomfortably. It was extremely explicit. I think Ray Stark at that particular moment in time was very upset and very distraught. He came from another generation, and sexuality was not to be exhibited in that fashion. And so I think there was a lot of conflict between Tony and Ray Stark over that.
My first meeting with Ray, I went to his office, which was just off Sunset, and the meetings with Ray were very cordial, but even though this material was not material that Ray normally responded to, I think that also scared Ray.
Tony has tremendous drive and life force, and that's what permeated his cut of the movie for me. To see that stripped back because of his battles with Ray, and other editors were brought in, the visceral sense of the movie really had dissipated. So what you have is a much more sort of languid film.
You sort of lose sight of your own vision when you struggle on a day-to-day basis, trying to do your version of the movie versus what the studio version is. You get somehow you get lost. Ray would fight on a daily basis. He was unforgiving in terms of, his pursuit of his own personality.
It was a heartbreaking experience. It was one of those truly heartbreaking experiences because what Tony wanted for it and what I think he was capable of giving was so much more than he was being allowed to give.
I think that's where Tony and Ray separated. Was Tony wanted this movie to be true for him, and Ray wanted it to be true for everybody.
There is something very beautiful about this movie nonetheless, and Tony's one of the few directors who has the ability to utilize landscape as part of the internal workings of his characters.
Normally what happens with director's cuts is people can't tell the difference. I called up the department that does these new DVD releases, and they said, yeah. I told them about my vision. They did their homework and heard that my cut was very different from what was originally released, So the difference between the original movie and this movie is this is just so much more compelling and so much more intense. My movie is now half an hour shorter than the original movie, which is definitely a first in terms of the history of movie making. I like pace, I like momentum, I like going right to the center of the idea and the center of the story whenever I can. When you do that, you cut away the dead wood, so it enables you to go to find the story faster and stay with the story easier.
I don't think that really the version that you're going to see right now is like maybe the version that he would have done 17 years ago. I think had he not been pressured, he would have done it differently. But I think given time going back in, I think probably reflects a certain sensibility that has evolved in him as a filmmaker.
He's about as good as they come. But he's a freak with the camera. He's a freak of nature.
Going down memory lane, I always think that the early days that I came to Hollywood, and you always think, oh wow, it was always much more extreme and different then. And you always think there's extreme characters around. And hopefully I'll be viewed as an extreme character when I pass on. You might say, well, he was out there, he was fucking a lunatic. But I like to be viewed in that way. But those years, there seem to be a lot of extreme individuals, and hopefully I'll be perceived and put in the same box.